I'm Anthony Robinson from Penn State, as Ann just mentioned. I'm in the Department of Geography there, and usually I give a research talk at NACIS, but today I'm going to talk about some research that's a little bit more personal and intersects with narratives and cartography in a couple different ways. The first is through the sort of apocryphal fish tale, not the literal tale, but the one that we might tell for those of us who fish, the tendency to lie about or maybe exaggerate a bit about what you catch. And in this talk, maps are maybe the thread I hope to convince you about anyway, is that maps are maybe a vessel for discovery and stories that may support those fish tales. I'll cover three different themes today. First, it will be about spots and secrecy and how people that fish tend to be protective of where they know a good spot might be. That intersects as well with access and legality. There are lots of restrictions about where you can and cannot fish. And I'll go through some ways that I sort of invert the purposes of several different maps, digital data sources, for my own edification to find great places to fish. Along the way, I'll tell some fish stories. Like this is the time that I brought a bass into my sister's wedding reception. My dad lives on a lake, and that's probably the first bass that's ever gone back to tell its friends it crashed a party. All the fish that you see me catch in this talk and what I do in reality the rest of the time as well, I return everything to the water, so went away safely. I started thinking about this talk initially because of this notion of spots and secrecy, and I questioning myself a little bit about like what's going on here when I get a question like this. I catch an enormous trophy trout in a place that I didn't expect to catch it, and one of the first comments one of my friends says is like, "Hey, that's awesome, like where is that? I'd like to go there." And as somebody who fishes, and I think this is common for lots of people who fish, that question is a little bit off kilter. It's a bit like asking where your favorite place to hike is. It's like, okay, like, well, what place are you going to share with me? This happens quite a bit. In this case, I caught another massive trout in a place that I never thought that there were any trout, on a lure that doesn't actually usually attract trout. So I was completely caught off guard. I didn't have a net. This fish ended up in the dirt, which is not where it's supposed to be. Ended up putting it back safely. But one of my friends, "Where is this?" And this is a spot that I really worked hard to locate, and I was very proud of once I found this. So I'm really interrogating this a little bit in this talk. It's definitely not just me. Other people who fish, I think about secrecy quite a bit in their spots, and as you can tell from these series of aggressively photoshopped, I'm not even sure if this is Photoshop, I don't know what's going on here, Facebook groups with people who fish are interesting places. People will share pictures of their catch, and they'll like do wild stuff to their images to make sure that you cannot figure out where they are. And this person has stated the reason why. I don't want to see 10 million people show up in my spot. I think this kind of thing intersects interestingly with social media, because there are now places where people do elect to share their positions. There's a thing called Fishbrain, for example, where people post and share exactly where they caught something. A lot of times the posts there are not actually correct, and you can tell because I'll see somebody holding up a giant king salmon next to a local lake where I live, where there's definitely no such thing. But sometimes they are definitely sharing their spots. I noticed that one of the things that Fishbrain tries to monetize as well is using kind of the collection of observations that they get, and then God knows what else, to suggest to people that they can pay and find out like spots that maybe are unexplored and will have a great chance of catching something. There's absolutely no way that this is that simple. So I would love to talk to somebody who works there if you can convince me otherwise. I'll come back to this a little bit later too, but another thing I would use this for is I don't ever contribute to Fishbrain. I just use this to find where people catch stuff. In this case, this is a reservoir that's illegal to fish in, and it turns out there's quite a few people catching fish there, so that's an interesting clue. I also think that, for many millennia, people have been protective of where they catch a fish. So I want to point out as well that for a lot of native communities, the specific locations in which fishing and aquaculture take place are sacred knowledge, and there's a wonderful project called the Pacific Sea Garden Collective, which is one example of many, looking at how native populations, native tribes, and communities protect and think about their places where they fish. So it's not just contemporary hobbyists. This goes a long way back toward thinking about fishing as a resource. Access and legality is an interesting aspect of mapping in the context of fishing. On the left side here, there will be some places that are open to the public, but only in very limited ways. And it's important to learn how to read signs like this and understand what loopholes they're allowing. In this case, the city of Lock Haven really doesn't want you to do anything at this public water supply area. You can't even bring your bees there, which has got to be disappointing if you put all those bees in your car. You got all the little, I mean, it's like really difficult to get the shoes on and all that stuff. It's just, it's thousands of little bees. You can't fish there. You can't have domestic animals. I guess you can have non-domestic animals. I don't know. I got some questions about this sign, basically. So this is not atypical. If you fish and you go explore places, sometimes you'll come across a spot and this is what sits there with you. In the middle here, this danger sign, to me, this is a sign of opportunity. So this says, strong currents and undertow, and I'm like, yeah, I like that. Fish are cool in those places. They don't care. No swimming, wading, or boating. Notice what word they did not say I couldn't do. So that means I can fish there, and I absolutely will fish in a place like this. So learning how to read a sign is important. We have the dreaded HOA example on the right. Where I live, there are not a lot of HOAs that have water access, but in the southeast especially, this is a major issue. There's a lot of wonderful little ponds and stuff, and homeowners associations are notorious for being really skeptical about the fishing on their property. One example I found when I came up for this talk, I can't believe that there's a place called Ronnie Van Sant Park. There is. It's in Florida, apparently, and this sign is actually a pretty useful one. It tells you exactly what you can do. One of the things that's kind of interesting about this one, too, is all adults must be accompanied by youth. So that means you got to bring a kid along with you, which is kind of an interesting type of restriction. So access and legality is really complicated. I've also seen this in the landscape. This is a spillway at a reservoir near where I live, and you can't see it in the satellite image very clearly, so I'll highlight it here in yellow line. There's actually a painted line at the edge of the spillway which indicates where it's legal. You can stay on the sort of far end of this line. The other reason you wouldn't cross this line is if water starts to come out of that spillway, you will die. So this is really the line of absolute limit. It's like, okay, it's not worth fishing past this point. Plenty of people do, though. This is also complicated for people that are new. If you're trying to understand how to begin this hobby, these are the kinds of official graphics that exist. And the cartographer, in this case in Pennsylvania, has the prompt of showing literally all of the data, right? This is a sort of a regional map of fishing opportunities in the state of Pennsylvania. If you zoom in on some of these areas, there's just hundreds of variables and different data elements that are all trying to compete for space here. These are all the different types of regulations on different types of waters. So lots of different legal frameworks that you might have to navigate, certain types of equipment that are allowed, types of taking that are allowed or not. This is really difficult. I also will use some mapping sources in kind of a maybe unorthodox way, or maybe not as they were intended. On the left here is a Strava heat map of that illegal to fish reservoir I showed you a little bit earlier, also indicating that lots of people go there. So this is an interesting proxy for me. I will look at these kinds of things and see that then as an opportunity, like maybe I can go there. On the other hand, this is that same spillway I showed you before. I happen to know that you can legally go down the path that I've highlighted here, but on Strava heat map, you don't actually see any evidence of that. And that's, of course, Strava heat map is a heavily biased data set that only a certain number of people actually participate in. So it doesn't help with everything, but it's kind of an interesting, looking at these gaps and missing this is also something that's intriguing to me. I will use other people's geotag photos, like Instagram, for example. Sometimes you can look up places and they'll pop up here. In this case, this is a place I was interested in exploring, and I managed to find one person who took a picture of the water from right on top of the dam, which makes me think that I can probably get there. So no fish in this case, but it looks like it's something worth scouting. In a more crazy, fanatical way, I will also dive deeply into people's YouTube videos. So there's lots of YouTuber fishermen, people who fish. There's lots of different ways to call people who fish anglers, so I just want to acknowledge that as well. So this person, Hidden Creek, this is bait for me, right? Hidden Creek produces huge pike. I'm like, yeah, that's cool. I want to catch a pike in Pennsylvania. Turns out in part of the video there, I find this state route sign. SR 1002, segment 90. And I'm like, yeah, I can probably figure out what that is. I know it's in Pennsylvania, it's got that sign. Hey, look, there's a bus that went by. Port Allegheny School District. So Port Allegheny, SR 1002, like, I got it. I found it. I thoroughly enjoy this. Like when it's winter and I can't get out as much, one of my best friends and I who fish all the time, we scout places this way. Like we'll try to find some place that looks interesting with a species that we want to target or something like that. I also will go through older narratives. So I was talking to another cartographer yesterday about this. What people write about places is also really, it's embedded with clues. This is it's going to be hard to read, but I'll just give you the synopsis. In 2011, I find a thread on a fishing forum from people speculating about a particular place and whether or not you can fish there. And some of the comments are like, someone once told me it's illegal to fish there, but I was never really sure. Could anybody clear that up for me? I've heard about there's like brown trout that they stock there. And, long story short, some other people sort of checked it out and said, yeah, it looks like it's fishable, and I'll head that way soon, and I'll let you know. And then the thread dies. No one ever comes back to close the loop here. So this is the place, and I'm trying to sanitize it somewhat because I actually don't want you to be there too. I am being selfish. It's an amazing place to fish. And in researching this area, this is a place where you end up going very fast down a curve on a steep downward slope on a highway. And you pass this beautiful lake, but it happens very quickly, and it's a really dangerous stretch of road, actually, with lots of accidents and a runaway truck ramp. So it's not the kind of place you want to like linger and hang out and see if you can get to the body of water there. But if you poke around and look at some other satellite photos, you can see that there's like this different kind of road segment there that pops off. And it turns out that this piece of road here, you can, if you go all the way down to the next exit, because there's a concrete divider in this highway, and turn around, go several miles out of your way, come all the way back, you can dive off on this little stretch here. And when I used the statewide LiDAR data, I was able to find that there are some little pathways that look like they're on this stretch, and zoom in a little bit more here so you can see. Along the edge of the lake on the north side there are these paths. That's from when this reservoir was constructed. They had to build some kind of temporary roads. And you can park in various spots and hike your way down to these now old, covered up, with material from the forest and things like that, but there's still paths there. And fishing the north side of this particular spot is legal. Turns out it's an amazing place. Beautiful, beautiful place. So sometimes I think one of the more intriguing things for me as a cartographer in fishing is these acts of, sort of when you get to discover something, not that it has never been discovered before, of course. I got a little bit more obsessive about this particular place and submitted my first FOIA request for anything. So I thought maybe it would be interesting to the people receiving it too that I did it for like a kind of wholesome reason, like I just love this place and I want to learn more about it. And then this FOIA request came back. They were very nice about it. I learned that there were several species I had never seen there at the reservoir before, that as early as the sort of early 70s, people were noticing that there were huge trout in this lake, which I have also confirmed. And at one point, the Pennsylvania state authorities actually stocked it with salmon, which was a failed, in the 70s, there were lots of experiments with stocking crazy species in the wrong place, basically, and that had happened here. And I had heard a story from a local person that, oh yeah, there used to be salmon in there, and it sounded like, to me, definitely a fishtail. So, to wrap up here, I think a couple different takeaways. Obviously, lots of places this might go. When it comes to spots and secrecy, sharing gets a little bit easier over time, and truly pristine locations, it's debatable that exists at all, but in the sense that I would think about it, they tend to vanish. Access and legality is really hampered because policy that's intended to protect different areas lags changes in technology, and we have overcorrections, like in the case of lots of public water authorities are super paranoid about anybody fishing anywhere in a giant reservoir because somehow that's going to impact water quality. It's a very nebulous connection to water quality. I've also been warned away from dams and things because of terrorism concerns, even though I would have to be bringing with me multiple trucks of explosives to do anything to a dam. My little backpack is not going to do that. And when it comes to mapping, one of the things I noticed in the current war in Ukraine is that geolocation from images is now, it's trivially easy. And it's a mostly solved problem and will become easier. So it'll be harder to protect your spots in the future. So I really appreciate your attention today. I hope that was interesting for you and look forward to chatting about it.
I have a question. In North Dakota, our state game and fish actually publishes, maybe I shouldn't say this, but they publish maps about stocking.
Oh, yeah.
And so does Pennsylvania do that as well?
Yep, stocking locations are public information. They're usually shared in like a spreadsheet, so it's a little bit tricky. And not only that, Pennsylvania will publish the time at which stocking takes place.
Bonus.
So like you could go and witness it. And yes, there are plenty of cases where surprisingly people then take those fish relatively quickly. So that's, to me, like the way I like to fish is totally not what I do. But for quite a few people, following the stocking schedule is really important. Yeah.
That seems like a no-brainer to look for any sort of stocking information. Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I was interested in the fact that you used an indigenous map of fishing areas, and I was wondering if that was used in consideration with context of secrecy, right? So indigenous knowledges are characterized by the ability to have secret knowledge or things that shouldn't be mapped. And I saw on your conclusion that the context of secrecy was not something you explicitly considered, or was it? And could you talk a bit more about that?
Sure. So the first part of the question is the example I showed from the Pacific Sea Garden Collective. So to be clear, that's a project that I'm not directly part of. It's just an example that I showed. So they made some choices about what they represent and how they represent it, and I don't really warrant it in terms of I don't know enough about how they exactly delineated those areas or got consent, if they did or not. I think the second part of your question was about secrecy and how it intersects with different types of knowledge. Is that correct? Sure. Yes. Okay, so the question is like, yeah, what different types of secrecy exist around fishing? Yeah, there's definitely, I think there's, hobbyist fishing knowledge that's like almost competitive or a little bit more along the lines of like, well, you tell me something and then I will share something with you. And it's more in the spirit of like, I put something into finding this place and like, I want you to share something with me. And that's completely different than protecting a space which is ancestrally yours and that you need as a resource and you don't want other people to ruin as a resource. So I think it's a completely different type of rationale for secrecy. I would agree with that. So the comment is about what else exists in terms of the frontier and research about secrecy in the context of fishing in this case. To be completely honest, this is my most self-indulgent NACIS talk because I like to fish. So it's not a research project in a deeper way. I would love it if somebody else would speak to that more deeply than I can right now.
We have another question here.
Anthony, thank you for that. One of the questions that I don't think you've answered is why, and maybe you can talk about poaching and people that break fishing rules, like fishing with bait and non-bait areas. So there are reasons why you might not want to share a spot widely.
Yes, and so that actually kind of connects a little bit to the last comment too. Sometimes it's not just about sort of friendly competition per se, but also that people impact landscape in disproportionate and different ways when they access the landscape. And sometimes you'll see that a spot has been really ransacked by people that have taken, every fish out of the spillway or something like that. Or the stocking situation is definitely one of those where legally you're not supposed to go and fish for a few months and let those fish go and spread out. And almost immediately, everybody who fishes has witnessed this exact thing of people then coming and taking everything. Enforcement of regulations is really, really uneven, very rare. I've been stopped one time ever in the 40 years I've fished to check my license. So yeah, I think that's a really important point, that some of this is also about, like, I don't necessarily, I hope that place can stay as protected as possible. I'm obviously enjoying it and using it, and I'm not sort of saying that, like, I'm not making a small impact myself, but sometimes those impacts are really not small when a place gets gains popularity quickly, especially if there are big species there. People will go and take everything.
There's a couple more hands up, but our time is officially over for this session. I please do encourage you to talk to our speakers, especially those who maybe didn't have time to answer your question. NACIS is the nicest, and I know people want to talk about their work with other people that are passionate about it. So this concludes Cartographic Narratives. Thank you very much to all of our speakers. Can we have one more round of applause?